My earliest memories of my grandma, Margaret, are filled with the soft hum of her voice as she stirred cookie dough in a big porcelain bowl. Her kitchen always smelled like vanilla and cinnamon, and I used to think that if love itself had a scent, it would smell exactly like that: sweet, warm, and safe. She was the kind of grandmother every kid dreamed of having. She wore floral aprons with lace trim, kept her hair tied back in a neat bun, and had these small round glasses that sat right on the bridge of her nose. To me, she was the living embodiment of gentleness. Whenever I scraped my knee or felt left out at school, she would hold me in her arms and tell me that life always had a way of balancing itself out. True love, she would say, and family, that's what makes everything worth it. As a child, I didn't really understand why she repeated those words so often. But as I got older, I started to notice that almost every story she told me carried the same theme. Whether it was about the neighbor's son who married his high school sweetheart, or about a soldier who came back from war to find the girl who had waited for him, Grandma always emphasized loyalty, devotion, and love that could stand the test of time. I grew up believing those stories were her way of reminding me what mattered most. She often said, "The world will tempt you with money and fame, but in the end, it's the people who love you that will hold your hand when everything else is gone." And honestly, I believed her with my whole heart. When my parents got divorced when I was 10, it was Grandma who became my anchor. My mom moved into a small apartment across town, and my dad relocated for work. They both tried their best, but they were wrapped up in their own battles. Grandma, though, she never wavered. She let me stay with her most weekends. She'd make pancakes shaped like hearts, tell me stories late into the night, and let me fall asleep on her old floral couch while she knitted quietly by the fire. I always thought she had lived the perfect love story herself. My grandpa, Thomas, had passed away when I was just 3, so I didn't really remember him. But every time Grandma talked about him, her face lit up. She told me he was her first and only love, that they met at a summer fair when she was just 17, and that he had stolen her heart with one smile. She described how they built their life together, how they faced challenges but always stood side by side, and how their love never faded, not even when his health started failing. To me, that was the definition of true love. And since Grandma was always telling me to wait for the right person, the one who'll never let you down, I thought she was speaking from her own perfect example. But the truth, as I would later discover, was far more complicated. The last year of her life was difficult. She grew weaker, her hands shook more often, and she sometimes drifted off mid-conversation. Still, even in her weakest moments, she told me stories. She'd hold my hand and whisper, "Love, darling, that's what matters most." I believed her, clinging to her words like they were sacred. When she passed away, it felt like a part of me had been ripped out. The house, which had always been filled with her laughter and the smell of cookies, now felt hollow. My mom and I began the process of sorting through her belongings, trying to decide what to keep and what to give away. Every drawer we opened seemed to hold a piece of her life: a recipe card, an old photograph, a necklace I remembered her wearing on Sundays. But then, while I was cleaning out her closet, I found something I wasn't supposed to. Behind her stack of winter coats and a pile of crocheted blankets, there was a small wooden trunk. It was old, with brass corners that had tarnished over the years. It didn't look like anything special at first glance, but it was locked. That immediately struck me as odd. Grandma's life had always seemed like an open book. Why would she need a locked trunk hidden away in the back of her closet? I almost left it there, but curiosity got the better of me. I searched through the closet until I found a small brass key tucked inside a showbox of buttons. My hands trembled as I fit the key into the lock and turned it. The trunk creaked open, revealing neatly stacked bundles of letters tied with ribbon. At first, I thought they were just old love letters between her and Grandpa, something sentimental she had kept tucked away. But as I picked up the first bundle and glanced at the handwriting, my breath caught in my throat. These letters weren't from my grandfather. They were from someone else. The handwriting was unfamiliar, looping and passionate. The first words I read made my heart pound. "My dearest Margaret, I think of you every single day. And though the world may never know the truth of us, my love for you is endless. I froze, reading the words again and again. My grandma, the woman who preached about loyalty and true love? She had letters from another man? My stomach turned as I realized what I was holding. These weren't just letters. They were confessions, intimate, secret messages exchanged with someone who wasn't her husband. I wanted to slam the trunk shut and pretend I hadn't seen anything. Part of me felt like I was betraying her by even looking. But another part of me, the part that couldn't reconcile the image of my sweet, storytelling grandma with these forbidden words, needed to know the truth. So I sat down on the floor of her closet, surrounded by the scent of mothballs and lavender sachets, and I began to read. Each letter pulled me deeper into a story I never expected to find. A story that would shatter everything I thought I knew about my grandma, about love, and even about my own family. Because the woman I thought I knew, the one who told me to believe in loyalty and devotion, had lived a secret life no one ever imagined. And the more I read, the more I realized that my grandma's greatest love story wasn't the one she told me about at all. It was the one she kept hidden, locked away in a trunk, for more than 50 years. The first letter I pulled from the bundle was dated June 12, 1969. My grandma would have been only 25 then, already married to my grandpa for a few years. The words on the page were filled with longing, written in dark blue ink that had faded slightly with time. Margaret, every moment away from you feels like an eternity. I see your smile in every sunrise and hear your laughter in every song. If only the world allowed us to be together openly. But until then, these letters will have to hold our truths. Yours always, Daniel. Daniel. The name made me pause. I had never heard of a Daniel in Grandma's life. She'd never mentioned a friend, a cousin, or anyone by that name. And the way he wrote, it wasn't just affectionate. It was love. The kind of love that consumes, that aches. I set the letter down and felt my throat tighten. My grandma, the woman who told me countless times that loyalty was everything, had been writing to a man named Daniel while she was married to my grandpa. Part of me wanted to stop reading, to shove the letter back into the trunk and pretend it didn't exist. But my hands betrayed me. They shook as I untied another bundle and unfolded another page. My sweet Margaret, last night was the most beautiful night of my life. I still feel your hand in mine, the warmth of your cheek against me. I replay our moments together in my mind and wish I never had to let you go. Someday, maybe, we will find a way. But until then, know that I am yours, in every breath and every heartbeat. I dropped the letter on the floor, my heart racing. These weren't just casual letters. They described meetings, touch, intimacy. My grandma hadn't just been exchanging words with Daniel, she had been with him. Suddenly, every story she had ever told me about Grandpa, the way she described their love, the way her eyes sparkled when she mentioned him, felt like it was wrapped in a shadow I had never noticed before. Was it all true? Or had she been crafting a version of her life that left out the parts she didn't want anyone to know? I leaned against the wall of her closet, clutching the letters like they were burning in my hands. My chest ached with confusion. This was my grandma, the woman who raised me, who comforted me, who became the closest thing I had to stability. And yet, she had been hiding something so big, so monumental, that it felt like I didn't even know her at all. Still, I couldn't stop. I kept reading. The letters painted a picture of a love that was both intoxicating and tragic. Daniel was passionate, poetic, and deeply in love with her. He called her his light, his saving grace, and often wrote about the pain of being apart. But what struck me most was the way Grandma wrote back. Yes, I found her letters too, though they were fewer, tucked in between his. Her handwriting was unmistakable, looping neatly across the pages I had seen in her recipe cards and birthday notes. Daniel, I don't know how to explain the way I feel when I am with you. You make me feel alive in a way I cannot describe. But you know as well as I do that I am tied to a life I cannot abandon. Thomas is a good man. He doesn't deserve betrayal. And yet, when I am with you, I cannot think of anything else but us. I hate myself for it, but I also know I could never let you go. I read those words again and again, my heart pounding louder each time. She admitted it. She admitted she was torn between two loves, her husband and this man, Daniel. And in those words, I saw something I had never seen before. A version of my grandma who wasn't perfect, who wasn't only gentle and sweet, but conflicted, flawed, and painfully human. The more I read, the more I realized this wasn't just some brief fling. The letters spanned decades. From the late 1960s into the 1980s, Daniel and Grandma had exchanged dozens, maybe hundreds, of letters. They wrote about secret meetings in nearby towns, stolen afternoons, and whispered promises of what could never be. One letter from 1975 stopped me cold. Margaret, you told me last night that if things were different, you would have chosen me. I hold on to those words like they are my lifeline. Maybe someday, fate will be kinder to us. But even if it never is, know this. You have been the greatest love of my life. And even if the world only sees us as shadows, I will never regret a single moment with you. I pressed the letter against my chest, tears welling in my eyes. Fate. That was the word that stuck with me. My grandma had lived her whole life telling me about the importance of choosing loyalty. Yet she had spent decades bound by fate to a love she couldn't claim publicly. I didn't know what to feel. Anger? Betrayal? Sympathy? All I knew was that the woman I thought I knew was far more complicated than I had ever imagined. When I finally looked up from the letters, the room felt different. The closet, the house, even the air seemed heavier, as if it carried the weight of this hidden history. I gathered the letters and placed them back in the trunk, but my mind couldn't let them go. Questions swirled in my head. Who was Daniel? What happened to him? Did my mom or anyone else know about this? Or had Grandma really kept it buried, a secret life hidden in the shadows of her marriage? That night, I lay in bed unable to sleep, replaying every moment I had ever shared with her. Her advice, her stories, her smiles. Had they been lies? Or had she been trying to protect me from the pain she had endured? For the first time in my life, I felt like I had no idea who my grandma really was. But deep down, I also knew one thing. I couldn't leave it there. I had to know the full truth. And to do that, I would have to dig deeper into the past she had kept hidden for more than 50 years. The next morning, I couldn't shake the weight of what I had discovered. The letters weren't just old paper and ink. They were proof of a secret that had lived right under my nose for my entire life. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands, staring blankly at the wall, my mind racing with questions. Who was Daniel? Was he still alive? Did anyone else in my family know about him? I knew I couldn't just sit with those questions. I had to find answers. The first person I thought to ask was my mom. She was Grandma's only child, and if anyone knew about Daniel, it would be her. But as soon as I imagined the conversation, "Hey Mom, did you know Grandma had a secret lover for 50 years? My stomach twisted. How could I say those words without breaking something inside her? She had just lost her mother. Dropping a bomb like that on her felt cruel. Still, I needed a place to start. I went back into Grandma's closet, pulled the trunk out, and started looking more carefully. Between the bundles of letters, I found a few old photographs, sepia-toned snapshots with curled edges. One of them made my breath hitch. It was of my grandma, younger than I'd ever seen her, maybe in her mid-20s. She was standing in front of a car, her hair blowing in the wind, her smile wide and carefree. Beside her was a man I didn't recognize. Tall, broad shoulders, wavy dark hair, and an expression that seemed to soften when he looked at her. He wasn't my grandpa. And in the bottom corner of the photo, written in the same looping handwriting I'd seen in the letters, was a single word. Forever, Daniel. There he was. A face to the name. I stared at the photo until the edges blurred with tears. This wasn't just some imaginary character in Grandma's life. He was real. He was flesh and blood, and he had loved her enough to put his name on the back of a photograph like a promise. The next step was figuring out who he was. I flipped through the letters again, looking for clues. There were mentions of towns: Dayton, Columbus, Cincinnati. Places not too far from where Grandma had lived her whole life in Ohio. There were references to a hardware store he had once run, to nights spent driving back roads, to a small lake where they used to meet. It wasn't much, but it was enough. That afternoon, I sat down at my laptop and started searching. I typed in, Daniel, Ohio hardware store 1970s. A flood of results popped up, most useless. But then, buried in a list of old obituaries and business directories, one name stood out: Daniel Whitaker. I clicked on the link. Daniel Whitaker had been the owner of a hardware store in Dayton from the late 1960s through the early 1980s. My heart pounded as I scrolled further. He had passed away in 1992. The obituary listed a wife, 2 children, and a note about his passion for fishing at Lake Hope. Lake Hope. That was the lake mentioned in the letters. It was him. I sat back in my chair, stunned. He hadn't just been some shadow figure. He had a family of his own. A wife, children. And all the while, he had been writing to my grandma, telling her she was the greatest love of his life. The discovery hit me in waves. On one hand, I felt a pang of sympathy for Grandma. She had loved someone deeply, passionately, but he had belonged to another life. On the other hand, I felt anger. Anger that she had lied, not just to me, but to everyone. She had painted her life with Grandpa as a perfect love story, when in reality, part of her heart had always belonged to someone else. I couldn't stop there. I needed to know more. I searched for Daniel's children. The obituary listed their names: Michael and Susan. Both would be adults now, probably in their 50s. I found a Facebook profile for a Susan Whitaker in Columbus. Her profile picture was of a woman with kind eyes and silver streaks in her hair. My finger hovered over the message button. How could I even begin to explain why I was reaching out? Hi, I'm the granddaughter of the woman your father may have had a 50-year affair with. Nice to meet you. I closed the laptop, my hands trembling. I wasn't ready for that step yet. Instead, I went back to the letters. This time, I read them with Daniel's life in mind. Each word carried more weight now that I knew he had a family. One letter from 1981 made my chest ache. Margaret. Susan had her dance recital tonight. I sat in the audience, smiling, clapping, being the proud father I'm supposed to be. But the whole time, all I could think of was you. How wrong is that? To sit beside my wife, pretending to be the man she thinks I am, while my heart is somewhere else entirely with you. Sometimes I wonder if I am the worst kind of man. But then I think of your smile, your touch, your laugh, and I know I could never let you go. I read it 3 times, trying to process the reality. He had lived a double life too. He had been there for his children, his wife, his community. But secretly, he had given his heart to my grandma. And she had let him. The guilt, the secrecy, the pain, it all spilled out in those pages. Yet, so did the love. Raw, undeniable, and impossibly complicated love. That night, I sat on my bed with the letters spread around me like fallen leaves. My grandma wasn't who I thought she was. She hadn't lived the perfect, loyal love story she told me about. Instead, she had lived 2 lives, one in the light and one in the shadows. I thought about what that meant for me. For my mom. For our whole family. We had inherited a story that wasn't the whole truth. And now that Grandma was gone, I was the only one who knew. But I couldn't keep it inside. Not forever. Because the more I read, the clearer it became. There was more to this story than love letters. There was something unfinished, something that had haunted both my grandma and Daniel until the end of their lives. And I was about to uncover it. By the time I finished sorting through the last bundle of letters, I realized something that shook me more than anything else so far. Daniel hadn't just been a lover. He had been the love of Grandma's life. The man she turned to when she felt trapped. The one she confided in when she couldn't say things aloud to anyone else. And yet, for all the words they had written, for all the nights and afternoons they had stolen together, There was always one thread woven through their story, an invisible wall between them that they never fully broke. I needed to understand why. The next day, I decided to do something reckless. I drove to Dayton. I don't know what I thought I was going to find. Maybe an old storefront where Daniel's hardware shop had once been, or maybe even a piece of his family still lingering in the town. I just knew I couldn't stay still anymore. The drive was 2 hours, and my hands gripped the steering wheel the entire time. I replayed Grandma's voice in my head, her words about loyalty and love, wondering how those words fit into the woman who had lived this double life. When I arrived in Dayton, I found the old hardware store building easily enough. The paint was peeling, the sign was gone, and a for lease poster hung crookedly in the dusty window. But as I stood there, staring at the empty shell of what had once been his livelihood, I could almost picture him unlocking the door, waving at neighbors, carrying heavy boxes of nails and lumber. I walked around the block, not really sure what I was looking for. That's when I noticed a small community library. My curiosity pulled me inside. In the local history section, I found a binder of old newspaper clippings. I flipped through it until a headline made my heart skip. Whitaker Hardware celebrates 20 years of service. The article was dated 1989. There was a black and white photo of Daniel, older now, his hair graying but his smile still warm. Standing next to him was his wife, a woman with a polite smile and eyes that looked tired. But what stopped me cold was the small caption beneath the photo. Owners Daniel and Helen Whitaker, proud supporters of the Dayton community. Helen, his wife, the woman he had stayed with while writing letters to my grandma. I stared at that photo for a long time. On the surface, they looked like the perfect couple, just like Grandma and Grandpa had looked in the photos that hung in her hallway. But now I knew better. I knew that smiles could hide entire worlds of secrets. I left the library with a heaviness in my chest. Back home, I couldn't stop thinking about the why. Why hadn't Grandma and Daniel ever left their marriages for each other? If they had loved one another so much, why not take the leap? The answer came in one of the last letters in the box, dated 1983. Margaret, you asked me last night if I would ever leave. The truth is, I've thought about it every single day for years. But then I see the faces of my children, and I can't do it. They are innocent. They don't deserve the pain of a broken home, the whispers, the shame. You said yourself you couldn't put your daughter through that either. We are both bound by more than vows. We are bound by the lives we brought into this world. And so, my love, we remain here, together, but apart. I hate it, and yet I know it's the only way. But please remember, no matter where I sleep at night, my heart belongs only to you. I pressed the letter to my face, hot tears streaming down. There it was. The reason. They hadn't stayed apart because they didn't love each other enough. They had stayed apart because they loved their children too much to destroy their lives. I thought about my mom. About the way she always said her parents' marriage wasn't perfect, but stable. How she used to brag that they never fought, that they always provided her with a normal childhood. That was because Grandma had kept her other love hidden away, sacrificing her own happiness for her daughters. It was both heartbreaking and strangely beautiful. A love that had burned for decades, but one that had to exist in the shadows because the light of it would have scorched too many lives. But then another thought hit me like a freight train. If Daniel had children, and Grandma had me and my mom, then there were two entire families who had lived side by side, never knowing they were connected by this secret. The weight of it all pressed down on me. My grandma had lived a lie. Daniel had lived a lie. And in the middle of those lies were families, children, spouses, who had no idea that the love stories they believed in were only half true. Suddenly, I realized something else. Maybe that was why Grandma told me those stories about loyalty and true love all the time. Maybe it wasn't because she had lived it perfectly herself, but because she wished she had. Maybe she wanted me to live the kind of life she couldn't. That night, I sat with my mom in the living room. She was sorting through a box of old photo albums, her face drawn and tired. I wanted to tell her everything, to unload the truth that was eating me alive. But when I opened my mouth, the words stuck. How could I tell her that her mother, the woman she adored, the woman she thought had lived a stable, simple life, had actually been in love with another man for 50 years. That every bedtime story, every family dinner, every photo on the wall had existed alongside a hidden life she never knew about? I couldn't do it. Not yet. So instead, I sat there quietly, helping her put photos into neat stacks, pretending I didn't know the truth. Pretending I wasn't holding an entire alternate history of our family in my hands. But I knew I couldn't pretend forever. Because deep down, I felt like Grandma hadn't wanted her secret to die with her. That's why she left the trunk where I could find it, tucked away but not impossible to discover. She wanted me to know. She wanted me to see the truth, even if no one else ever did. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized, maybe this wasn't just about her story. Maybe it was about mine too. Because if her life had been defined by love she couldn't claim, then what did that mean for me? The days after finding the last letter felt heavier than the days right after Grandma's funeral. Grief had already left a hollow ache inside me, but this secret, this love story hidden away in a trunk, made the ache sharper. It was like I was mourning her twice. Once for losing her, and once for realizing I'd never really known her at all. But even as the truth gnawed at me, I couldn't shake the feeling that she had wanted me to find it. I thought about the way she always looked at me when she told her stories, her eyes soft, almost searching. She never said it outright, but maybe her endless talk of true love wasn't about what she had with Grandpa at all. Maybe it was her way of keeping Daniel alive, of passing down pieces of him without ever speaking his name. The more I sat with that idea, the more the bitterness inside me began to shift. Maybe Grandma hadn't been lying, not exactly. Maybe she had been telling me the truth, just not the whole truth. Still, I wrestled with what to do. Should I tell my mom? Should I reach out to Daniel's children? Or should I keep the secret the way Grandma had, protecting everyone else from the pain of it? I didn't know the right answer, but I knew I couldn't just leave the letters sitting in the trunk. One evening, I spread them all out across my bedroom floor. Piles of yellowing paper, decades of words, a lifetime of longing. I read them out loud to myself, one after another, until the room was filled with the voices of two people who had loved each other more than the world ever allowed. And when I reached the very last letter, the one Daniel had written in 1992, the year he died, I broke down. My dearest Margaret, the doctors say my time is short. I find myself thinking not of the life I lived, but of the life I never had. The one with you. But don't grieve for what never was. Know instead that you were the greatest gift I was ever given. Even if the world never knew us, we knew. And that is enough. If there is another side, another place beyond this one, wait for me there. Yours always, Daniel. I clutched the paper to my chest, sobbing. He had died still loving her. And she had lived another 30 years carrying that love silently, privately, with no one to share it with. How had she managed it? How had she walked into family dinners, smiled at birthday parties, told me bedtime stories, while her heart quietly broke for a man who wasn't there? And yet, she had done it. She had carried it all. For her daughter. For me. For the family she had chosen to protect, even at the cost of her own happiness. It was in that moment that I realized something. Grandma hadn't left me the letters to destroy my image of her. She left them so I would see her fully, not as a saint, not as a symbol, but as a woman. A woman who had loved, made mistakes, sacrificed, and survived. She wanted me to know that love is not perfect. That sometimes, it's messy and painful and doesn't fit neatly into the life you're supposed to have. That sometimes, the choices you make aren't about what you want, but about who you're trying to protect. And maybe, most of all, she wanted me to know that love in its truest form isn't always about having someone, it's about holding on to them, even if you can't. The next weekend, I drove back to her house with the trunk in the passenger seat. My mom was in the kitchen, sorting through dishes to donate. I told her I needed an hour alone, and she didn't ask questions. I went into Grandma's backyard, the place where we had spent so many summer afternoons tending her garden. The roses were blooming, the same ones she used to clip and put in a vase on the kitchen table. I dug a hole at the edge of the garden, deep enough to hold the trunk, and I placed the letters inside. Before covering it, I whispered, "Your secret is safe with me, Grandma. But your truth will live in me too." Then I buried it beneath the soil, letting the earth take the weight of the story she had carried for so long. I didn't need to tell my mom. I didn't need to tell Daniel's children. Some truths are too heavy for the living, and maybe it was enough that I was the one who knew. What mattered was this: I would never again see my grandma as just the sweet old woman who baked cookies and told stories about loyalty. I would see her as the woman she really was: complex, flawed, brave, and deeply, impossibly in love. And in a strange way, knowing her secret made me feel closer to her than ever before. Because now, when I think of love, I don't just think of happy endings and picture perfect stories. I think of my grandma, of the way she loved fiercely, even in silence, of the way she carried both joy and sorrow in her heart and still gave so much of herself to the people around her. Her story taught me something no fairy tale ever could: that love doesn't always look the way we expect. Sometimes it asks us to sacrifice. Sometimes it hurts. But if it's real, it stays. It lingers. It shapes you, even when it can't be spoken aloud. And that's the truth she left me with. Not just that love matters, but that love, in all its messy, complicated forms, is what makes us human.